but it's very hard to kind of figure out what a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan should look like.
You want to try and push things to move quickly.
You should almost never have to wake up and look for a job from scratch.
You want to go in knowing what is your market value.
What does looking for a new role look like? I always negotiate. I think it's healthy to negotiate.
They were stuck in a role in one company and all they needed was them to go to a different company, exact lateral role, and they would just make it work.
The average time frame for leaving jobs is 18 months.
Every day you come energized and you're learning something.
Do I really need to ask for more? Should I ask for more? I feel like you should ask for more. What should you do?
Deals, offers, they all hinge on energy. So what you want to do is you want to say, I love this role. I want to do my best work of my career. I can't wait to get started. I just need this thing. If you give me this thing, I'm going to sign on the dotted line. We're good to go. Hello.
Hello.
Wow. This is just us today.
We just have us today. We wanted to talk about a topic that we get asked about a lot. And, I think Sriram and I, we've been in this industry, in the tech industry for over a decade and a half. And, and I think one of the things that comes up, especially around this time of the year, is new jobs and finding new roles. When should you do it? How should you do it? What's the whole framework we use? When should I quit a job? And so on and so forth. So everything around new job, new roles, finding the next thing in your career. We just wanted to do one episode to cover a lot of those and what's worked for us, what we hear from other people, best practices, see where that goes.
Yeah. One good place to start is, should people quit their jobs and when?
Yeah, I think this is, it's end of July. For many companies, tech companies, this is performance review season. And performance review season is always, it's kind of, it does a few things, right? One is it gets you a sense of evaluating where you are.
First of all, it's so scary. It's
It is so scary. I mean, no matter where you are in your career, it's always, it's never fun to go through performance reviews, but it also gives you a sense to take a step back and be where am I in my career? How am I doing? What have the last 6 months been, 3 months been, last year been? Kind of take stock, but also get a sense of, should I do something different? We've often had people reach out and say, I want to become a product manager. How do I do that? I have not built that experience yet, but I want to switch roles. Or I just want to leave this company, or I just want to leave this manager because of whatever reasons. And so there is no one size fits all on when should you quit and when should you find a new job, but we can talk through a framework that you can go use. So what would you say is when is it time to go quit?
I think quitting is often just an emotional thing where I think somebody once said this, you most time people don't quit teams, jobs, they quit their managers.
Yeah.
I think that's true. But I also think what sometimes can happen is people have an emotional reaction to a manager or a situation and they want to leave,
right.
which is also very probable. But maybe the bigger question is, how do you kind of approach your career in general? And I think one way to think about it is you want to think of roles in these 2-3 year stints.
Okay.
And you want to think about, what are you getting out of each role? And it could be any number of things. I think learning and experience is a big part of it. Some of it could be, getting scope in what you work on. Sometimes it can be as simple as, notching up a title or notching an experience which you feel is missing. Some of it could be monetary. I think they're all, very valid, fair reasons. But I would try and think about things in a, 2 to 3 year or maybe even 5 year arc. And think about in your current role, one, okay, where are you in that arc?
Right.
And maybe you decide for whatever reason, and we can talk about that you're not in the right part in that arc. But then where do you want to be the next 5 year arc? And that may mean one company, that may mean multiple companies, that may mean a different role in your current company.
Right.
There are many, many ways to go tackle it. But the framework I often try and push people to is not to think about, I heard, I'm a PM at a company or I'm an engineer and I hate this team, I hate my manager, that's great. I've often left teams because of that. But just be hey, you are at this point in this arc of your career and your story and your trajectory. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? And how do we get the pieces in place? And I think one thing that does is it just sort of sometimes changes how you look at the problem and look at the situation.
Right.
And you can kind of approach it in a slightly different abstraction and a slightly different framework. So,
got it. I guess for me, the one thing I've always struggled with, and I don't know if this is true for others, is when I was early on in my career, when people would say, or I would talk to folks who mentor people, and they would be like, think about where you want to be in 5 years or 10 years. And I've always struggled with that because, at least tech and what we do changes a lot. And 5 years is a lifetime, right? Sure, you can go from a IC product manager to a lead product manager. You can start managing people. You can be a GPM and you can kind of scale. Similarly, for engineering, you have these tracks. But it's very hard to kind of figure out what a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan should look like. How do you go deal with that when it's like it's not super clear on where you want to be in 5 years?
I think there's a few ways, hacks I tell people. I think one very, very easy thing to do is just look at somebody else and say, I want to be that person in 4 or 5 years, and just do the memetic clone.
Yeah.
And all of us probably have people we look up to. We might be mentors. We might have celebrities.
Yeah.
And it could be anybody, right? It could be, for example, let us say you're at Google and you are a mid-level product manager, and you say, well, I want to do what Neil Mohan is doing someday, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you climbed up the ranks and, now, CEO of YouTube after many, many years.
Right.
Or maybe you have very different aspirations. You say, well, I want to, chalk up a couple of experiences. Then I want to be CEO of my own company in 6-7 years.
Got it.
Maybe you want to be a founder. But I think usually just like picking names and memetics. And this is not, I think sometimes people recoil from this because I think everyone's like, well, I have my own different path and I want to cover. I respect that. But it gives you a reference point.
Yeah.
Right? It's a little bit like when you have like young athletes, they often say, well, I see this
I want
player.
to be Jordan.
Yeah, but also I see this player playing in this position and I can do that. And that is this journey for me. So I would be like, well, what is that journey? And and it could be anybody, right? It could, for example, if you're an IC engineer, you're saying, well, I want to be an incredibly senior technical contributor. I want to, John Carmack is probably hard aspiration. Well, I want to be John Carmack. Or I want to, be a CTO of an organization. You want to be Greg Brockman, from CTO of Stripe to, being president of OpenAI. So, but I think these memetic, names are great reference points because then you can be like, okay, if you want to do that, let's talk about where you are, what your current trajectory is, what pieces you have, and where you need to be.
Right. So, okay, I say I have a path. 5 years from now, I want to do A, B, and C. I am in this job where I don't feel completely fulfilled. I think you'd mentioned this before. People don't leave teams, companies, people leave managers. And that's both like, bad managers, and we've dealt with like a whole list of those. But also, even if you have like a reasonable manager, they might not be watching out for your career velocity and how you want to scale and grow. Like you might just not be compatible on where you want to be. So let's say things are not working out. How much should you try to like fix the situation, stick with the system? Because I think early on in our careers, we've often gotten advice that's like, just stick with it, do the thing, put your head down, stay loyal, don't like try and figure out the big bad world outside. We've also gotten this counter advice like just, if you're not happy, you're not happy, just like go. And I think Silicon Valley is like particularly notorious for this, where I think the average time frame for leaving jobs is like 18 months or 24 months or something, which I think is a little too short. Like, I don't know if you'll have like enough time frame to like ship something, learn end to end, and just like build long lasting products within that shorter time frame. Like to build lasting things, you have to stick around a little bit longer. So how do you figure it out? What's like the right balance there?
Well, it's very different based on, I think, when you're a big company and a startup. So some of these conversations, maybe, you may go, well, that's not applicable to me.
Right.
Because if you're like a Series A company, there's no other job to go to. Right? There's no other team you can move to. You probably have to leave the company. Right. But if you're at a Facebook or a Google or a large company,
options.
You always can move to different divisions. So some of it, you might have to figure out how it applies to the situation. I do think there are a few red flags which I think people avoid. One is having multiple job changes over like a 5-year span where you're maybe spending a year in each role is often, you have a question of, well, was this person incredibly unfortunate to be in a multiple bad situations and that happens? Or is this person not willing to see things through? And I think if you find yourself in multiple of those situations, I think you might need to think about like, well, maybe you're not making the right choices. Maybe you're avoiding maybe you're not spotting some obvious problems when you join a new role. But I think getting the heart of your question, I think the fundamental thing people look for is a sense of velocity. And velocity is often really hard to quantify.
Yeah, how do you measure that?
I think it's just a sign of like, are you making progress? And I feel like it's one of those things where when you have it, you know it.
Right.
Velocity could mean you're trusted with more and more scope. Velocity could mean every day you come energized and you're learning something.
And people kind of tend to gravitate towards you. You know,
Yes.
there are, within companies, you'll always find these pockets of people who are these career velocity people, where they just attract other good performance people like a magnet, and they all want to like work together, build stuff together. You can see them just humming. Like there's just this like momentum and energy that is hard to go quantify.
Mhm.
And those are the people we've noticed that tend to get ahead. And they get ahead from not just like shipping the things that customers want and doing all the things that the company needs to do to be able to grow and succeed, but they also have really good working relationships. They often are like good coaches, mentors for junior people on their team. You can kind of see that and feel that.
There's also one things where, sometimes people may just, velocity is often like an annoying phrase because it's so hard to quantify, and it's not as when you have it, you know it.
Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing about velocity is I often seen people where they were stuck in a role in one company and all they needed was them to go to a different company, exact lateral role, and they would just make it work. So often it can be a function of your environment. Sometimes it's also one of the interesting things I think I was talking to somebody about recently is the way you come into a company can really maybe influence how people think of you, and they put you in a certain box. So one thing I've sometimes seen people do is when they've not been able to say change management's perception of them, you often have an engineer who's seen as like, this person is an amazing developer, he's not a great manager. He or she's not a great manager. And maybe they are, but maybe there's an incident which happened, or there was one thing, and then people kind of really slot you in, and you never find yourself getting those next level opportunities.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need like a change of setting. But I would say velocity is like, you just feel it when you have it, and you feel it when you don't. It's in every meeting, the kind of work that you do. I think the question then you have to ask is like, well, how long can you go when you're not feeling good about it? And
when do you know that it's time?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I would say one is first of all, I think you have to give every company, team, situation, a company, division, some period of time. And one good unit of time is seeing something through from start to finish.
Okay.
So maybe maybe there's a product which you're involved at the very beginning, or you see it to the end, or there's the next version of something.
Right.
Like you think about like, okay, what is the thing that I'm going to put on my LinkedIn? And you've seen the entire cycle from start to finish.
Right.
And the reason is not just for bragging rights and talking about it. That's definitely a part of it. But also to be like, hey, you've seen the entire loop at the company, and you don't have the chance at like because every time there's a product launch, there's often some changes which happen, and you can see it. But I do think it's important to go through like one cycle. Like for example, I left Facebook after like a few years there, but I had seen like a couple of iterations of like products launching and so on. And I think if I'd left before, I would never probably been fulfilled. So I would say try and stick it out to one cycle, find out whatever the cycle is, and then leave. The situation I tell people to avoid is they start somewhere at 4 or 5 minutes and like they absolutely hate it. That does happen, but I think it's sometimes that you want to kind of go through one cycle. And even if
do you really need to stick it out? I often kind of look at it as, if you really, really hate it and there is just this fundamental disconnect, you're better off exiting sooner than just like grinding it. Every context is different. We don't know all the situations, right? There are some where you're like, it's not that bad, I can like grind this out. But either you leave very early on, or you stick it out for a full cycle.
Yeah.
I think the worst is to like kind of sort of meander halfway through, and then you're just like, you have no energy, you just hate what you're doing, and it shows. It really reflects on a day-to-day basis. That's, I think, the worst of all worlds, because everyone's just putting up with you, you're putting up with everyone else, everyone's just miserable.
Yeah. I think you also I think you once said this a few years ago where you often don't want to run away from something, you want to run towards something.
Right. The thing that I want to ask is like, let's say you're in a point where you know that this is not the right fit for you, what you're doing, for a lot of reasons. Things are generally good, but you just want to take that next big step. You want to try a different role. You want to go to a different kind of company. Oh, hey, you're really interested in, I don't know, like AI, and you really want to like gravitate towards that specialty. So whatever it might be, you've decided that it's time to go. How do you look for a new job? Like, is it like you wake up one morning and you're like, to do. I open up my LinkedIn and start reaching out. What does looking for a new role look like?
Well, I think the best part, well, just to go back, I think one of the challenges sometimes have when people they go in this role and they hate it and they want to leave is then you often in a hurry to find the next thing.
Right.
And the next role may not be open right there, but you don't want to get out of the situation.
Right.
And so you wind up making a suboptimal decision.
Yeah, you've mentally quit before you actually put in your notice.
Yes, and you're also picking the next role, which is not great. So now we have two problems because if somebody looks at your resume and they go, okay, this person quit his job in like 4 or 5 months, that happens, right? Because people have shitty situations as managers. They're going to give you like a mulligan and out. But then let's say you wanted to...
what and out?
A mulligan, it's like, it's like, it's a pass. So you're like, okay, that happens. But then what happens is like, let's say you're like, I really want out. You take the first available thing. But the first available thing isn't great. And then it's 10 months in, you're like, well, I want to leave here. Then all of a sudden you have like 2 roles, maybe 3 roles now happening in an 18-month period. And then you have to, every future employer, recruiter is going to look at, well, what is going on here, right?
Yeah.
Is there like a series of bad decisions? Is there something wrong? And of course, each one of these may be reasonable but they often have like a knock-on effect, which
individually they're fine, but cumulatively it just looks weird.
Yeah, and maybe you find the right one, but often when you're under pressure to go find something new, you don't. So which kind of brings back to how do you look for a new role? I think the best way is, I think Netflix had this, which is like always, think about whether this is the right place for me, and always be looking.
They would actively, at least long time ago, I don't know if things have changed, but they would just be like, feel free to interview. It's fine. And if you feel like you get a better offer with respect to compensation or title or whatever, at least be willing to come have a chat with us, because maybe we haven't looked at you in the right context, or we haven't like compensated you fairly for the work that you've been doing, and somebody else is like willing to recognize that, and we should too. Or we decide, well, we kind of take our chances. So it sounds a bit more transactional and mercenary, but really I kind of like the intent of, you're welcome to look around and just talk to other companies, and it's not a taboo thing. And they made it okay and normalized it, which I thought was very interesting.
There's a thing in there which is of always maybe looking at what other options are.
Right.
And this can sometimes go counter to this notion of you have to be loyal to the place you work for.
Right. So what's the balance there?
I think we said this in previous episode. I think the right answer is like you always want to have a very active network, because the right way to look for a role is you don't. And when you're thinking of a change, you ping a few people in the industry, people that work with you or know you, and you say, hey, I'm thinking about something else. In every single case, there'll be some conversation like, oh, we are working on X, Y, why don't you come have a chat and see whether there's a fit.
Yeah.
Maybe there is or there isn't. Or maybe you're not looking, but when that person is doing something interesting, maybe they have a new project or they're starting a new company, they ping you and that opens up. So I think having a very active network of peers, I would kind of slot peers into a few ways. One is people you've already worked with, which is great because they know you have existing relationships.
They could be your best references,
Great references, but they also want to maybe work with you again. Hopefully some of them want to work with you again. So that's one category of people.
Yeah.
And what you want to do there is actively, meet up with them every once in a while, see how things are.
Right.
Maybe you have roles that you can get them into and continue maintaining ties. You'll be surprised how often people just don't maintain ties to people that they've worked with in the past. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is just industry peers, right? Like, for example, let us say you're an engineering manager at, say, Facebook. You want to be like, well, let me go meet some interesting engineering leaders from a Google, an Apple, a Stripe, and all these other companies which are kind of in the same ballpark. And so when those people, one, obviously, first of all, the way this helps you is like you always want to be recruiting, right? And so those people sometimes will have unhappy jobs and unhappy roles, and they're going to call you and be like, hey, I have this manager I don't like, and then be like, well, you should come talk to us and maybe we have a role. So you always want to be recruiting, but it goes both ways, because then when you are unhappy, you can have a chat and they go, well, no expectations, but when you come have a chat and see what we're up to.
Right.
And those things lead to,
But basically, I think what you're trying to say is the worst kind of looking for new role times are when you actually desperately need to find a job. You should never, if you can help it, and there are always, extenuating circumstances, but if you can help it, you should almost never have to wake up and look for a job from scratch. You should, we've talked about this before, there is real value in just building your network, and networking is always, it sounds like such a smarmy word, but really it goes both ways. You will need these people, they will need you, and it's always healthy to maintain that. and never have to wake up and be like, hey, I need to look for a new role. Can you help? Kind of thing. Those are the worst because you're under pressure. You're not thinking clearly. Your peers want to help, but they don't really know how to help you. And so it's just like you're just minimizing the window in which you can just go out, explore, find opportunities that you would really like and have the time frame to make a decision. So I would just maintain a healthy network.
Well, how do you do that? Because I think people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, well, I have a busy job, I have meetings.
Everybody, yeah.
Do I grab coffee? What does it mean?
That's the thing. I think, Sriram, like you've talked about this a lot before, and I've learned a lot from you doing this because I genuinely think you're a natural at this. And for a lot of people, it doesn't come naturally. Networking just feels like a dirty word. It seems so abnormal. And you also have busy lives. Everyone is busy, especially if you have family, kids, all of that. It just adds to it. But I kind of see it as always keeping tabs on what's happening in the industry, who's doing what, who's building what. Like I kind of seek a lot of energy from seeing products, using products. And the simple ways I do it is if I see a really nice product out there or new company or startup, I would reach out to the founders or I would send a note to the PM there or the CEO there. And I would be like, that's really nice. I really liked how you built this, or have a genuine organic conversation with no expectations. These all have to be infinite sum, and these all have to be I'm coming from a place of just understanding what you do and how you've done it, and kind of start building out your core network of people who are similar to you. You have similar taste in products, aesthetics, that kind of thing. And you can start there. It doesn't have to be full-fledged. I go to every networking event. I go to conferences. I've seen people do that. Honestly, that's exhausting, and it's a level of commitment that most people don't have. It's also kind of scary, and I don't know if the ROI is worth it and all of that. So for me, it's about looking around and keeping tabs with what's happening outside and just reaching out to people. I'm a big fan of cold emails, cold LinkedIn outreaches, that kind of thing. But what tends to happen is when you're ready to find something new, you have this set of people who will always be in that orbit, in this circle, where you can kind of say, hey, just in case this, I'm just putting it out there. But ideally, I'm trying to do these and these things, or I'm trying to start a new company or whatever. Put it out there. Through my career, I've been very afraid to do this. But every single time I've kind of put myself out there, good things happen. You will not believe the number of people who reach back out to you and genuinely want to help you. This is one of the big reasons why we love Silicon Valley. This is such a paid forward culture here for everything, right? No strings attached. We just want to help. So one, maintain a set of cohort of people who you get along with, who you like, whatever is good for you with respect to keeping in touch, but actually keep in touch. The worst ones are where you reach out and say, I want a network, add me on LinkedIn. Don't do that. Offer value, offer help, be of service, and keep in touch with this orbit of people. And when the time is right, you can put yourself out there and good things generally tend to happen.
That's true. And maybe we should do an entire episode on this because it comes up a lot on just cold emails and networking. All right. What do you look for a new job?
Thankfully, one of the things that has happened is I've never had to wake up and be I need to find a job, right? It's just happened that there have been roles that are interesting or people would have reached out. And look, not everyone's going to be in that situation, especially depending on where you're living, what kind of opportunities are around you, or remote versus not. There are lots of considerations. For me, when I look at a new job, everybody says this on learning. So I look at it as what am I going to learn from this job? What do I get out of it? It's okay to be a bit selfish and focus on yourself on when I exit this job in 3 years or 4 years or whenever, what is the thing that is going to look yeah, I did that. I can check a checkbox that I wanted to go do. And you can be tactical and selfish about it. I think about the title, the role. I know it's again ooh, don't worry so much about title. But if you're not going to worry about your own career path, who else is going to do it for you? It's okay to think about it. It's fine to not agonize about it and have the trade-offs. But you should at least go in going what am I going to be known for? I don't want to be a chief random officer. What does that mean? And be kind of focused on that. Who am I going to work for? Manager, I think, is really important. When you are going through a recruiter and this endless cycle of interviews, always make sure that you talk to the manager at least once, if not many times. You want to make sure that you get along. If in person is possible, meet them in person, because you're going to spend so much time with this person. You're going to look to them on like, am I doing okay? Are you like, have you got my back? So I look for that. The other thing that is again a dirty word is compensation. It's okay to think about salary expectations. And, for tech jobs, it's like base plus equity or RSUs or whatever you have. But the math needs to make sense for you. It can't be like, trust me and good things will happen, because those are the kind of jobs where you're going in just not feeling great about it. So worry about net, does it work for you? Can you afford it? Will you learn a lot? Is your manager somebody you can get along with and build really great things with? Does the product space energize you? There are lots and lots of these criteria. What are these for you?
Well, I want to talk about the comp side later, because I think that's the negotiation, which is one thing we want to talk about. On the role, I think one of the things I've learned is you have to understand the system of the company you're getting into, which is how does the company work? And sometimes it's easier. I mean, if you say, how does Apple work? Well, that's like a multi-trillion-dollar company with a zillion people, much harder. Yeah. But if most companies are like, what is the company? What do they sell? How do they make money? Where do you fit in that equation?
Great point.
Where is your manager, your manager's manager? Where do they fit? Are they in the critical path? Are they a new thing? Do people care about them? How much power does your manager have organizationally? Is this person new to the company themselves? Have they been around for a long time? So and these are not good or bad, because you're all clients, but you want to understand the playing field that you're going into. Like, for example, I often see people doing, well, I'm going to join this new effort in this company. You come in and, that thing is some VP funded it, that person's gone. It's like, it's a ghost town.
Should you ever join one of those like super new efforts, which like 2-3 people?
But very much so, but you kind of understand the dynamic you're going into, and is it work that you like? Do you like the team? Does the person, if it's a new effort, companies often have a sense of inertia. So they want to kind of stick to what they're doing. So if it's a new effort, you're like, okay, where is the energy first coming from? Maybe the founder really cares about the passion project. Great, go do that. Maybe there is a very well-respected executive who has been chartered to go do that. Those are all very, very good things. But if it is like, somebody else, there's I can think of a particular example. Somebody is like, well, I will quit this company if you don't let me do the side project and hire a few people, right?
Yeah.
So you become one of those people, then, well, you're not in the critical path. You're grudgingly accepted at best, and then it's a bad situation.
Then the exec just gave you the blessing to go do this, but they really hate you for it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like you're never resourced. If you join that team as a team member, you don't know if you can like actually have the capacity to like run with things and ship stuff. Yeah. So it's just it's a failure state, basically.
Yeah, my general bias is for most people is to look at things which are a little bit on the upswing. So, is there going to be growth? Are you going to get to do new things or take things to completion? So those are all, and all these are obviously very dependent on whether you are, say, 21-year-old or whether 35-year-old, like very, very different situations. But I think those are general things. I would say understanding the playing field is very, very key of where you're going into, because then, the one thing you want to avoid is having a surprise where you're 1 or 2 in, and then like, well, we don't know we're going to ship anything because all our peer teams hate us, right?
Yeah.
Or we're shipping this product, but sales can't sell it, and this company is going down. So those may be good situations, because maybe, you want, you bounce around a lot and you want some stable time on your resume. That's fine. Or you want a particular lifestyle, but you at least you want to be surprised. You want to have done your homework. And the way you do your homework is you talk to everybody. You talk to existing people, you talk to others in the industry, you talk to people who have worked with your manager. You just do this 360-degree conversation and you figure everything out. But once you do that and you say, okay, I'm going to go, I would say one very short rubric is, does it energize you? Like, I think I have this whole joke about, like, every time I start a new job, like at the first day, do I, like, send her a text being like, when you go through orientation, do I send a text like, this is great or this is bad? Because at times that I say this is bad, it's not worked out. At the times that this is great, it's actually worked out. So the first, usually you can tell on orientation day,
right,
whether you made a mistake or not.
Maybe. I think you need to be far enough along in your career to be able to make a call based on orientation day. And we'll also, I think we'll do a whole episode on like, what does it mean to join a new job? Like, once you start, what do you do? We big believers in like a 30, 60, 90 framework and all of that. But I think generally, if you've decided that you need to look for a new job, give yourself time, give yourself space. Finding a job takes time. No matter what your peers tell you, which is like, oh, this whole thing just like dropped on my lap, and in 2 weeks I was like working at this place. Sure, but that's not the norm. That's the exception. Finding a job where you feel like this is a good place for you to go to it's a pretty big step. You're going to spend time there. So take the time. Don't be under pressure.
Yeah. I think if you run a process, the process means you've made up your mind of like, this is the company I want. These are the kind of opportunities I want. You've spoken to a few people. And, there is always a little bit of a temptation. Sometimes people I'm just going to continue looking. Yeah. But you put a bounded process. You're like, I'm going to spend 6 months. I'm going to do X number of companies. I'm going to do a couple of loops, a few.
Or like drop a list.
Yeah, drop a list. I think you'll feel good that, maybe you haven't found the optimum outcome, but you found a really good one.
You found a good one. You understand the trade-offs going into it.
Yeah. Now, there is another version of this where every once in a while, you're going to get an opportunity your way where it is to Sheryl Sandberg's quote, right? Like, if it's a rocket ship, don't ask what seat. The rocket ship shows up and you just want to get on it. And the rocket ship is not just because you're going to make money, hopefully that happens, but it could also be because you're around some amazing people.
Yeah.
Like, for example, for me, like being at Facebook, that era, like so many of those people are going to do amazing things, and so just being close to that network.
But also you got to build out the Facebook audience network, which I think is, has like demonstrably been meaningful for the business, and it'll always be something that you did.
Yeah, right? Yeah. But even if that hadn't happened, I think being around some really smart people, it shows you what is possible. Because I remember going to Facebook and I was like, the level of competence that time was so high.
Right.
Everything just worked. People just build amazing things over a weekend. You're like, oh, this is not possible. And in a way, I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say if you're looking for a new role, generally look for a place where they will up-level you. And there are many cliches on this, like, oh, you shouldn't be the smartest person in the room, like that kind of thing. But really look for a place where you can truly learn. There are people who are like, holy crap, like these people have figured it out and they've done this many times over and I'm here to go sit down and learn. I think when we first joined Microsoft, it felt that way. Like we were like kids out of college. And there were all these people who've been there for like 20, 30 years, like kind of took us under their wings. And we looked at them and we were like, this is amazing. Like these people are at like a level that is just so good. Not so much like, not so because of like an IQ difference or whatever. I think it's really more of like, they've done this over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. They've like seen what it takes to go ship these world-class products over decades. And there is that level of experience that you just can't get unless you do it. And so it was great to just be there in that room and learn from these people. So optimize for you getting into this room and being like, man, when I get out of this role or this job, I'm going to feel really good about where I ended up.
Negotiation. So you want to take a role.
Yeah.
The recruiter says, well, they're excited, you're excited, and you get this, how do you say happens? They make you a call. They be like, I'm going to give out some numbers. I'm going to send you an email.
Make an offer that they can't refuse.
Well, we'll see. And, there is usually, most cases say there is like a compensation number, there is an equity number of some kind.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I think there is so much awkwardness around compensation and pay. I've lost track, even in this year, of the number of people who just call me and or like text me and be like, I got to negotiate. I'm really bad at negotiating. Do I really need to like ask for more? Should I ask for more? I feel like you should ask for more. What should you do? And there's no one size fits all. Look, it depends on the job. You love the job. You love the people. Everything is a slam dunk. You don't want to haggle over comp. Fine. It's up to you. Like, it's like, don't stress out over it. Net, it'll all work itself out. Like you will pick up the skills. You will end up working with some amazing people. The upside will all be worth it. Like I would not just lose sleep over that. In general, my philosophy, and I don't know if it's the same as yours, honestly, is like, I always negotiate.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy to negotiate. I think it's, you kind of get a sense of, where you stack rank in the ecosystem of the company. I also look at it as, if you can get through this, there is like a non-optimal conversation. Like money-related conversations are almost always a bit awkward. If you can do this right now, being outside the company, you kind of come in with a set of like, yeah, I've had that. Like I've had that as like a common context, and you can like get past that. But if you've either been like a pushover and you just take like the first offer, you've never had to do that, you're going to have a lot more awkward conversations with your manager, with the recruiter, and so on. And you might not have the skill set. I don't know if that makes sense, but I kind of look at it as like a test for myself on, can I do this before I join? And it's almost like, I don't want to say it is a sport, but it's now not less about the dollar value. It's really about like, can I do this?
Right.
and want to put myself out there and have that conversation.
Right.
And I think it's healthy to have awkward conversations.
Yeah, I think so. So this is one of those conversations which is, I think, very dependent on the stage of the company. For example, if you're the fourth or fifth employee in a startup, you're talking to the CEO, the range and conversations will be so dramatically different than if you're talking to Google or Facebook. But let's say it's a somewhat large company, CDC above, a large company. The first thing you have to understand is like you have to do your homework. And there is a step before this where you have to figure out what level you're being brought in at. And level is like not exactly number, sometimes number, but it's like more like what stage of the organization you're being brought in at. And I think often like people, the mistake they often make is, or they're like, well, I came in at this lower level and then, and it's much harder for you to go up the ranks. And very often I would say, it's much easier to have this discussion before you join the company and say, hey, given my experience or given what I'm going to bring to the table, I need to be at this higher tier. Then you're stuck in the system inside. So that's number one. The second part is you really want to do your homework because a lot of these companies, there are these bands that people can operate in. So even the options for where you are very kind of constrained in the band. The person you're talking to probably doesn't have the power to offer you anything within like sort of a narrow window in terms of equity and stock, and your manager doesn't have the power. Your manager doesn't have the power. If you're a superstar, maybe you can get outside that, but in the media case, you probably can't. So I think the first thing you want to be armed is this homework, which is, okay, what are other peers in this space? Like, what are the titles? What are the levels they're coming in at? This title I'm getting, is it commensurate with where I should be? And then this offer, like, where is it in the range, right? And usually it's probably they start off as somewhere in the middle. So that's number one. So you want to go in knowing, like, what is your market value? Because if you don't, you have no reference point, right? Like, are you too low? You don't even know how to ask. You're not armed with any information. Second thing then you want to do is like you have to understand the person you're talking to does this all day. The recruiter, they're having multiple of these conversations. They've heard everything. If you're the manager too, usually the managers won't negotiate with you on compensation.
I mean, depends on the size of the company. If you're like a small startup, and look, when I built my startup, I was the hiring manager, I was the recruiter.
Yeah.
And also the constraints of a startup is very, very different. So you kind of look at it as which stage of the business, who are you talking to, and kind of customize your approach depending on that. With a startup, you can go in, honestly. Again, at startups, I've often, helped founders where they would be like, this person came in from a FANG company and is asking for X in base pay. And we're like, well, that's unrealistic because startups by nature are like scrappy and, don't have a lot of cash flow.
Yeah.
The bad. So you need to figure out, you need to do your homework on where you fit in and what's possible.
Yeah. And once you do your homework, I think the final part on this is you want to always convey enthusiasm for the company.
Right.
And you want to try and push things to move quickly. Right? Like, because at the end of the day, your recruiter is being measured on can they close you or not. Your manager really wants to get you if they come in. And what you don't want is you want to be like, oh, that person, it's been 2 weeks. They've been negotiating every single little thing.
Yeah.
And then they lose energy. And deals, offers, they all hinge on energy. So what you want to do is like, you want to say, I love this role. Yeah. I want to do my best work of my career. I can't wait to get started. I just need this thing. If you give me this thing, I'm going to sign the dotted line. We're good to go. Yeah. Right? Like, and very often people botch this. Right? They'd be like, oh, I'm going to ask about a zillion different things. And you're negotiating, haggling over every tiny thing. Worse, they often haven't seen classic Silicon Valley offer letters. So you get like people asking for things which nobody else would ask for. So if you do enough homework, you always convey energy and enthusiasm. And the recruitment manager goes, oh my gosh, I want to fight first, but they really want to do this. We just need to make this one thing work. And, and then we have them in, then you're good. And also because once you start, you don't want that manager to be like, oh, that person caused me so much trouble.
Yeah.
You want them to be like, oh, I'm so excited to get
Exactly.
going.
I mean, you want to come in with like high energy and momentum. Time kills all of these, right? Like the longer you take, the more low energy or unconvinced you seem. And so even if you're not saying it on the calls, it just feels that way because like 3 weeks, 4 weeks of just negotiating just feels like, why? Do they not want this? Kind of thing. Hopefully, this is kind of fun.
We should do more of this. Okay, well, if you're listening to this or watching this, just tell us what you think. Ask us questions or stuff you want to hear about job changes,
right,
changes.
Right, and also like leave a comment on your own experience. We'd love to hear from you on like, was there a time when you tried to move jobs, leave a job? How was that for you? What did you learn just going through your experience? And just tell us what you think overall.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.